All right, here we go.
Now,
Well, hello everyone. Mike Licona here, and my friend, mentor, Dr. Gary Habermas. Every year, let's see, when did you guys start coming? When did you and Eileen get married?
96.
96. Did you guys come the first year?
That's a good question. Either 96 or 97 to be the first year.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Say it again.
Either 1996 or 1997 would have been our first year.
Okay. Yeah, well, if it was 96, then this would be, let's see.
29.
Yeah. Except we did miss 1 year.
COVID.
Yeah. Well, it still would be 29 because that would count as the 1 year, the first year, because a year would not have elapsed. So
Yeah, and COVID was difficult. We tried to schedule it like 3 times and we just couldn't get it in.
Okay. Cool. Hey, let me do something real quick. I don't normally do this, so I want to make sure everyone that we're coming through okay. So let me just make sure we're on. Okay, it looks like we're on. All right. Well, I hope you all can hear well, and cool. So I want to talk about your most recent book. You you did like my book at one point, and it was one of the largest books ever written on the resurrection until you came out with volume 1 of On the Resurrection. And this thing's well over 1,000 pages. What is it?
1070.
1070. Mine was like 716 or something like
Yeah,
that.
but why do you say like I didn't like yours? I still use yours all the time.
Well, I
It's
appreciate it.
great.
It's hard to,
It's great.
it'd be torture to say, okay, I want you to read all 3 of these volumes for our course,
Yeah.
And volume 4 is coming out soon. So anyway, tell us, this says On the Resurrection, Evidences. Now, hold on. You've been studying the resurrection of Jesus. You are the expert, the #1 expert in the world authority on the evidence for the resurrection. You are 11 years older than me, so you are 75.
I am really old. That's to finish that sentence.
You
I
are
am really old.
very old.
Yeah.
When did you start studying the resurrection?
Oh, you don't want to ask that because everyone's going to laugh. I told my people my doubts were framed by 2 deaths. My great-grandmother died when I was only 8 years old. My doubts didn't start then. I was like a mid-teenager when I had some real serious doubts. And to show that they were fairly serious, by the time I was 17, I had 1,600 3x5 cards on the resurrection.
Okay, so when did you start? How old were you?
Mid-teens, 14, 15.
Okay, so you've been doing this for
A long time.
60 years, almost as long as I've been alive.
And that's why I'm really old.
Yeah, you are old. So, all right, that's volume 1. That covers the evidences. So this is all the evidence for the resurrection?
I wouldn't say it's all, but I mean, it's the ones that I thought were the major ones.
Okay, so that's volume 1. Volume 2, refutations. So tell us what this one's about. And this one feels like it's a little bit shorter. Yeah,
Sure. 800?
it's only 800. Well, if you eliminate the indices.
Well, the reason I said this because Amazon counts the indices when they put the page numbers in there. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, without the indices, it is 854 pages. With the indices, 882 pages. All right. So what's this one about? Refutations.
Refutations. That's what it's about.
Okay.
All right. What I did in here was take major theories aimed at the resurrection. Now, I want to be clear about this. Not all of them are quote unquote naturalistic or non-Christian approaches. Some of them are Christian views that take other than what we like to say is the New Testament view. For example, some Christians think that, like, say, Paul on the way to Damascus may have saw Jesus as less than a physical body. Okay, so that's in there, that kind of stuff. But it's alternative views to the resurrection, most of which are naturalistic.
Okay. And then your most recent one, this came out what, May?
May 15th.
On the Resurrection, Volume 3, Scholarly Perspectives.
Yeah, and for most people who say all Habermas does is write on pro and get good and bad uh, refutations and pro treatments of the resurrection. This one is really not apologetic. There's some apologetics in there, but that is like a who's who, or I like to call that volume a critical lay of the land. Where are we at present? And a critical lay of the land. My editor, his name's in the book there, Ben Shaw. Ben tells me there's almost 8,000 footnotes in that volume. So we try to survey a lot of sources. I think just a little short of 600 different scholars, but we use many of the scholars, we cite them over and over,
Okay.
depending on the topic we're talking about.
931 pages of text, 968 pages, including the indices.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and again, we're not trying to prove anything. I want to be clear. Ben and I, we put a lot of non-Christian, they call themselves non-Christians. That's why I say, if someone's calling himself non-Christian, I feel like I can call them non-Christian. A lot of skeptics, I have their theories in there, and I'm real open about what they say against the resurrection, and we just state it. We don't refute it. We either quote them or we paraphrase them, but we let it stay. We don't sit there and think, oh no, we've got to give some refutations. That's why it's a lay of the land. It's a who's who, critics and non-critics.
Okay. All right. So let's do this. I'm going to start taking some questions. Now, this is the first time I've kind of done this stuff. So
Okay.
I usually have someone helping me with this, but so feel free to, if you're watching, I can see some folks are watching, feel free to submit a question and to Gary. I do want to, I have a friend named Casey, and he's got a question for you, so we can kick it off with that. How's that sound?
Okay.
Okay. Casey's question is this: if Jesus rose from the dead, what happened to his bones?
What happened to his bones? Well, I think the majority of folks who answer that and believe in a resurrection are going to say he was raised from the dead, and his resurrection appearances were in a new body, a body that was changed, and whatever was there came with him. So if he was flesh and bones, if he was not flesh and bones, whatever it is, that's how he appeared. So you're not going to find his bones anywhere. He was changed. As Paul says, we're all going to be changed. We're changed in the twinkling of an eye. Obviously, that happened to Jesus too. So we don't ever answer the bones question because it either was part of him or it wasn't, but it's not going to be in the tomb.
Okay. All right. Well, haven't got any questions yet. Maybe you could ask him in the chat box on here on the video here on YouTube. I'm not sure. I wish I knew how to do this better. So until we get a question, let's see.
Sure.
All right. So you've been doing this for 60 years.
About exactly.
All right. Oh, I know. It's something I wanted to ask you. So you were telling me earlier that someone had told you that there are several skeptics out there who are asking or they're really pushing back on you in a specific manner.
In this volume.
Yeah, in this
Yeah,
volume.
yeah.
About, I think it's, you cite, was it close to 6 or over 500 different scholars?
Uh-huh.
More than 500 different scholars. So, but most of those that you have listed in the index are Christians. I think like 350, you said, or about 350 of those 550 are Christians.
I have not counted the index names and said how many. Oh, I see what you're saying. You mean people who write in this book? Yeah, it's been reported to me so far that there's been 3 different skeptical scholars who have said something like this. Habermas says he cites more critics, unbelieving of the resurrection critics, than he cites Christians. But when you go back and look at the names, I guess that's what you're getting at. When you go back and look at the names in the index, it looks like there's way more Christians in the index. Okay, fine. Instead of trying to nail a person on something and then tell everybody, imply the guy's being dishonest or something. Well, why doesn't somebody ask me what I mean? And here's what I meant. When I say I'm citing far more critics than non-critics, from what I recall from my own count, about 1/3 of all the people in the book are evangelicals. About 2/3 are not evangelicals. So what I meant was, I have way more people who would not call themselves evangelicals whose critiques apply there. So I might give any simple question and have a list of 10 names. Maybe 7 of them, we do them alphabetically, by the way, alphabetically. Maybe a number of them are critics and they go off on us. And maybe 1/3 of them are evangelicals. And so I have the mixture. But overall, I have way more citations for people who would not call themselves, as far as I understand, people who would not call themselves evangelicals.
Okay. How are you defining evangelical?
Well, let's use a real general definition. I'm not going to say somebody who believes this definition or that definition about inspiration or that kind of stuff. I'd say evangelicals are people in general who take the Bible seriously. They take the Bible as their guide. They take the Bible as the book out of which we preach. But most of all, I define evangelicals as the Greek word evangelios, and it refers to somebody who preaches the good news of the gospel, which I think is the way, like, for example, Mark says, and he begins his gospel saying when Jesus came forward, he was preaching the gospel. And that's where we get the word evangelical. So there's no doctrinal test for who we call evangelical. It's kind of like saying conservatives and non-conservatives, if that
Yeah.
helps. I don't know.
All right, give us for those of you who may not be familiar with your argument, you have what's called the minimal facts approach that you've been doing for years. What is the minimal facts approach? Why do you like it?
Okay, maybe I even back up a step. Why did I start doing it? Um, I the minimal fact says I can use a relatively small number of facts. You've been with me a lot during this process, and we've gone everywhere from 3 to 6 facts. I think is fair. And presently, I'm using 6. I know you sometimes use less, and I've used less before. But they're facts to which critics will consent. I mean, you'll find these things in Rudolf Bultmann. You'll find these things in a lot of critical scholars, and they allow this material. Now, I want to be clear about something. Here's another thing skeptics go off all the time. You, when you cite Bultmann and all that, you think these minimal facts are true because the skeptics think they're true. That is so far from my definition. My definition of minimal facts, here's the first definition. I accept these facts because many historical facts and other facts, psychological facts, medical facts, the facts show these to be true. Matter of fact, if anybody's interested, I can give an average number of arguments per 6 facts in that book, and it's a fairly sizable number. So the first thing that makes a minimal fact is that there are many pieces of data, real data, medical, historical, philosophical, New Testament, Greek, whatever, many evidences in their favor. Secondly,
In other words, it's a fact because there's good supporting data,
which is
really good supporting data.
That's
So in
correct.
other words, if you're going to say something like Paul, who was a non-believer out persecuting Christians, had an experience he believed was the risen Jesus. That is a fact because it fulfills 2 criteria. Number 1, it has really good evidence that supports it.
Yeah, now in Paul's
Behind it.
case, even critics accept Paul as an eyewitness.
Right.
And
So
they say
but
that,
that's the second
yeah.
criterion, right?
No, the second one is that scholars concede these facts because they think my facts, I don't mean mine, they accept these facts that I present. They think they are true. Well, if they think they're true, then I get a good start, I get a running start if we all agree. One of the, as you know, and both you and I in our historical writings, one of the criteria for writing history is to go where the majority of historians go. So this is to go where the majority of critical scholars who do New Testament stuff go. So I'm just saying, don't blame me for being happy that that almost everybody, I mean, I don't have a certain percentage, but that they're going to agree. But that doesn't make a fact a fact. Everybody in the world could agree with me. Everybody, let's just say at one time everybody believed the world was flat or the moon was made of cheese, just silly things. That doesn't make the world flat or the moon made of cheese. So
Okay, so when you say the minimal facts approach, you are only using facts that meet those two criteria.
correct, but
Number
more
one,
importantly,
number
facts.
one, number one, they're strongly supported by data, and
Yeah.
number two, so strongly supported that the vast majority of critical scholars grant them as facts.
Yeah, it's almost
Right?
like I say, and by the way, they agree too. So, but that makes me feel better about the data because it's a good starting point.
Yeah,
That does
because
not
they're
establish a
not
fact.
granting them because they're biased. If anything, they're willing to grant something that goes against.
In spite of some of their critical
Yeah.
beliefs, perhaps.
So you can build a case on that. Well, we'll get to that case in a moment. Let's take a question here. Would you, here we go. Would you use the Shroud of Turin as a tool to evangelize Muslims? This is something my neighbor brought up tonight, not as a tool to evangelize Muslims, but she mentioned, her name's Diane, and she mentioned about the Shroud of Turin, this cloth that's supposed to be the burial cloth of Jesus, or at least some think it is. So you can tell us what the shroud is in a moment, but just to answer this person's question, would you use it as a tool to evangelize Muslims? If so, how would you use it?
I would generally say, so I'm not called down later in this, generally no. Generally, I wouldn't use it. However, if somebody asked me what the shroud was or asked me if I thought it was an evidence, I would explain it. And if it was relevant to the point, I'd use it. Notice in the first volume, if you look at the index, the first volume was evidences. There's a lot of reference to the shroud in the book because I say things like this. If the shroud is true, that would help here. I say things like that, but I don't argue for the shroud in the book, and that's how I would be. I would kind of leave it out of discussions unless there's a reason to bring it up, like I was asked to, or they made a point that the shroud shed some light on, but not generally.
Okay. So explain what the shroud is now.
The shroud is a piece of linen.
By the way, and we'll talk about a time when we did use it with a Muslim as evidence.
Oh, yes.
But before, explain what the shroud is.
And by the way, even in that case, they wanted to talk about it and brought it up. So yeah, I'll do it on those cases. The shroud is a piece of linen, a 3-to-1 linen weave. It's about 14 feet 3 inches long, about 3 feet 7 inches wide, and it was wrapped around the body of a dead man. Now, if I could use your pen and hold it up like this, the cloth is wrapped. Where am I? That way, so that if you open up the cloth, the body falls out. The cloth is long and it's together. It's not two pieces. But the body falls out. It wraps the body long ways, and the feet are at the open end. The head is at the closed end. Now, a side issue. People go, I just get asked this regularly. Why is there a gap between the two heads, the front of the face, the back of the... Why is there a gap? Real easy answer is because apparently when the body was put in the tomb, the cloth, when you're sliding it in one of the cubicles, the top simply lapsed up over the head. And so there's no top of the head, but there's a front and a back and the whole front of the body and the whole back. And it's really an enigma. And it's moving in a direction that's... I try not to jump in. I'm not a physicist, but there have been a lot of physicists who argue that the image on the shroud is a scorch from a dead and crucified body. So we look at it and say, does it look like Jesus? And you're off and running, if that's what you're talking about. But I don't even usually like to bring it in a discussion of the resurrection.
And anyone who wants to look into this further, they can go to shroud.com. That's got a lot of information, don't they?
It is the probably number one online source for the shroud. Yes, that's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah, I know. We know some people who are also experts on the shroud. I think of Oliver, which you met the other night. He came to your talk on the shroud. There's Dave Glander. There's your friend Dale. I forgot his last name.
Dale Glover, the
Dale Glover.
Canadian
Yep.
philosopher in Toronto.
These guys know about the Shroud quite a bit. Now, you believe it's authentic, don't you?
I believe it's authentic, but not like I believe the resurrection's authentic. Shroud guys, when I do interviews on the subject, because I'm asked to do interviews on it, they get a little angry with me because my percentage is a little bit low. I frequently say, on the Shroud, I feel like I'm like 80% sure, but then I tell them if you get an 80% of one of my tests, you're going to flunk. So that's, that's not the best percentage in the world. Because you know why? Because I leave room for this. If a fake comes up tomorrow, I've got to deal with that. And if the Shroud is a fake, so be it. The Shroud is a fake. And I'm going to make enemies for saying that. But I call it an empirical object, so therefore it is judged by empiricism. But there's a lot of reason to think the man buried in the Shroud was a scorch made the mark on the cloth, and this man was crucified. Now, you could say it was somebody else. You could say it was fake. That's your business. You can go where you want.
I remember Barry Schwartz. He was
Exactly.
a Jewish agnostic who was the official photographer on the STURP team, Shroud of Turin Research Project, that team that actually went in and analyzed it.
1978.
So a Jewish agnostic. I spoke to him on the phone. In fact, he contributed a chapter in the Festschrift for you.
He did. He
Raised on the third
until
day.
He passed away of leukemia a little while ago. He was a very
like a year
close,
or two ago, right?
Yeah, right. I had a very close friend of mine, and you're right. He was kind enough. He starts out and he says, "I'm an unbeliever," but he says, "Here's why I think the Shroud is authentic, and why I think it's Jesus, even though I'm Jewish."
Yeah. Which was interesting. And I said, well, Barry, I remember asking him over the phone. I said, Barry, why haven't you become a Christian? He said, just not interested. I said, but if Jesus did rise from the dead, and you said you think that the Shroud suggests that he did rise from the dead, I mean, wouldn't you want to embrace truth? And he said, well, it just isn't important to me. What could be more important than the eternal destiny of your soul?
Yeah, no, I was good friends with Barry, and I've been with him in person and on the phone, hours of each. And he said to me, I don't mind investigating this. I hear all kinds of people telling me resurrection's there. I'm not there yet, but I'm open. I'll listen. Here's a comment from him that I thought was one of the neatest things ever. He said, most of my speaking engagements occur in Baptist churches. And he said, so Baptists come up to me and they go, hey, Barry, let me tell you about the plan of salvation. Let me tell you about the gospel, like we said earlier, definition of evangelical.
Mm-hmm.
And Barry goes, a lot of Jews are famous for being angry when Christians do that. He says, I'm not at all like that. He says, here's why. He said, they're telling me the story of their cross and their religion because they love me. And it's nice to be loved. And so if they're loving me, I'm listening because I want to be thankful and I want to listen and be friendly because they're being friendly. I just thought that was a really interesting response.
Who's that magician guy? Penn? He's an atheist.
Tiller?
Yeah, we've seen that. I'm sure you've seen that video where after one of his presentations, he's a famous guy.
Okay.
Penn and Teller, something like that.
Yeah, it is something like that, I think, but I don't know who they are.
Yeah. He said someone came up to him, gave him a Gideon Bible, said he really appreciated his his performance, and he wanted to give him this. And he said, I took it, and said, that took a lot of guts for that guy to do that. And he said, I got thinking about that later on. Some Christians are afraid to share their faith with others. But he says, look, I don't believe it, but I got thinking about it. He did that because he loved me. How much would you have to hate a person that if you believed that they were going to go to hell when they died because they didn't believe, how much would you have to hate that person never to want to talk about the Lord with them? That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And it really left him pondering.
Same thing Barry Schwartz said. And Barry, anybody who knows him, well, I called him a hippie. I said, dude, you're a hippie. He goes, no. He goes, I really was a hippie in the 60s. He said he was a person-loving gentleman. And I'm telling you, we did a postmortem show on him with about a dozen people. Nobody met Barry and didn't just like the guy forever.
Mm.
Seriously wonderful person.
Yeah, he seemed like a good guy. All right, we can come back to the shroud a little bit, but we got another question here. This is okay. So Nathan Wilson's idea: he paint a figure on glass, lay it over the linen, leave it in the sun. The sun bleaches the cloth except where paint blocks it, leaving a photo-negative image. What are your thoughts?
Okay, Nathan, call us and tell us. I know Nathan. Nathan was a graduate student of mine. He's a brilliant guy. I'll give him all that. And he does this thing. And I seriously, he's a Christian who tried to show the shroud was not the real thing. I respect him doing that, and I'm fine with anybody who does that. But I don't think Nathan's view does it. I think Nathan's like he says, like the questioner says, Nathan's the, experiment shows things like dark light and left-right reversal and all that kind of thing. But I don't see it doing the biggest things like cloth to body distance. I don't see it
Off the body
adjusting
distance, that'd be like the three-dimensionality.
three-dimensionality. Why do photographs only of the shroud show up 3D? The
Mm.
teeth underneath, what causes that? Superficiality, cloth to body distance. Um, these are some of the major arguments. And I think Nathan can show some pretty good things from this, but I don't think they solve the biggest mysteries in the shroud. Hey, Nathan, call us if you want to, and you're listening. Go for it.
You know, that negative thing you talked about, I think that's neat. So you have the shroud and you can barely see the image in it.
Yep.
But when that photographer back, was it the 1800s?
1898, Seconda Pia, an
He
Italian
he
photographer.
he takes the photograph of the shroud, and when he develops it, back then, all of us who are in our 60s, 70s, maybe 50s, know what negatives are,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so you'd pull the negative, which is the exact opposite of what a photograph looks like. So whatever, if it's bright outside, then it looks like night in the negative. If I'm Caucasian, I look black on that. A black person looks white.
Yeah, there's a light, darkness, left, right, reversal.
Yeah.
And when Secunda Pia, no, in those days, they had a like a bucket, a shallow pan, and when he put the negative down in it, developed in this, what, the wispy face comes out looking like, whoa, this dude's staring at me.
Yeah, it's like if you look at the shroud itself, it's not real clear, but when you look at the negative, boom, it pops.
Right. And
And
so whenever people lecture on the shroud, they like to show both what you stood in line for up to 8 hours in some of the exhibitions to see, and what your photograph says you saw.
you know, interesting. When you were lecturing on the shroud the other night at Lilburn Christian Church with Peter Razor, there, the pastor, Dave Glander brought that life-size photograph of the shroud, and I went up to look at it, and he says, take your cell phone. You got an iPhone? I said, yes. He said, take the side button and click it 3 times. And I did, and it turned to look at it negative.
Oh,
And he says, now put it over the shroud. And yeah, it looked like a negative. And boom, that image just popped out. It was pretty cool.
it is. It is, but they're not the hardest things in the world. When I debated the shroud one time, it's on my website. When I debated the shroud, I gave 10 arguments, possible arguments for its authenticity. The left, right, light, darkness, they were down at 9 and 10. So if you're going to show that stuff, that's fine. There's things people can produce, but you got to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You got to get the big ones when you try to reproduce it.
Okay, so got another question here. This is from Peter Verchinsky. Sorry, Peter, if I mispronounced that. When you use the term critical scholars,
Yes,
most people will take that to mean scholars who are not Christians.
I understand.
But that's not what you mean by critical scholars, correct?
Well, I'll tell you the way I define it in the very first volume. Critical scholars are those with terminal degrees. Now, if you want me to define terminal degrees,
I mean, they're going to
usually
die.
PhDs, pardon me?
They're going to die.
Yeah, terminal.
They're
Yeah,
dying from
terminal degrees
exhaustion and
means
getting that degree,
you've got the basically highest level of research you could have in a certain subject,
like a
and they're usually
PhD.
PhDs, THDs, or in Germany it'd be DPhils.
D. Phil from Oxford.
DPhils from Oxford are maybe the most respected degree in the world. Those are terminal degrees.
You think they're more
Secondly,
than a D. Theol?
D, yes, DPhil for sure,
No.
and in a research area that is relevant to resurrection studies. So you go, well, what's an area relevant to New Testament studies? Well, certainly New Testament. I would even say Old Testament, because the Old Testament guys aren't expert in the New Testament, but they know the languages and they know how to do that kind of research. So a lot of times Old Testament guys are great. Historians, philosophers, people with degrees in Semitics, people with degrees in ancient history, any kind of history, ancient history, or I already said philosophy, um, archaeology. In some places, you can get a PhD in archaeology. So, uh, terminal degrees, as much as you can study in areas of relevance. And the question now people question me on this. I'll say it real clearly. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or a non. If you consider yourself a non-Christian, if you consider yourself a Christian, we don't judge them. We don't know who's who. But if you consider yourself one or the other, that's kind of irrelevant at this point. It's how much work do you have done as a terminal? Do you know about what you need to know? And is it in a relevant area? That's a definition of critical scholar. They can be evangelicals, they can be non-evangelicals, they can be atheists, they can be skeptics, they can be
It's kind of like a
believers.
movie critic. A movie critic would be someone who's looking at things from a really technical perspective,
That's
right?
a good point,
So
because they can be either
they could be
pro movie or
exactly.
con movie. They can be pro or con in the movie, and these people can be pro or con on the Shroud or the Resurrection. They can be pro or con, but the reason you listen to them is they've paid their dues. They've got as far as you can go, basically, in studies, two things. As far as you can go on these relevant studies on a relevant topic. It's not it's not good, for example, to have a terminal degree in electronics.
Gotcha.
It has to be a terminal degree in an area that's apropos
All
to
right,
New Testament
let's
studies.
move on. So, can you talk about the Roman flagrum used for the shroud? Or I guess that seems like the shroud gives some sort of suggestion that the Roman flagrum was used.
Yeah.
Is the flagrum used for the shroud the same as the one used in the Passion of the Christ? So, the one that's used in Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, which, by the way, is my favorite movie of all time. I love that movie. I saw it 11 times in the theater.
It's rough.
It is. I remember when I saw the trailer that it was going to come out the following year, that I think it came out in 2004?
I'm not
2004,
positive.
it came out. Um, I remember I did a 6-month study on crucifixion. I went back and I looked at every ancient reference I could find on crucifixion and the tortures that preceded it. And it was such a sobering study. It's like sometimes I just had to close the books and walk away. It was just so
Too
disturbing.
intense.
And to me, it seemed like Gibson's a movie, though not perfect in the way it portrayed it. It seemed
Yeah,
pretty
like the
close.
10-foot python crawling through the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, but you know what? Even though that didn't really happen literally, the symbolism in there, I don't think most Christians would object to that based on what it says in Genesis, right?
Right. Oh yeah, yeah. Genesis 3. Yeah.
He will what you will crush his head and he will bruise your heel.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of interesting. So the the
The
markings
flagrum.
the markings from the flagrum on the shroud, would that have been similar to what we saw in the Passion of the Christ, where they were literally just taking chunks
Well,
of flesh out
they
and
flayed his body with the beating, obviously, the movie. Now, in the Shroud, you can't tell how many times that fellow's been beaten. Why? A couple reasons. One is burn marks have taken out part of both the shoulders and a few other key points. You obviously cannot count whipping marks in areas where they're not present because of the fire. But on the Shroud, the object that did the whipping seemed to be, well, we've seen pictures of them. Actually, one has been discovered in Italy, and it doesn't have the beating utensils on it, but it has the handle. And the one of the shroud looks like it had three prongs on it, and attached to it were like dumbbell-shaped pieces of lead that were designed to gouge out flesh, and that's probably where you get you're telling the ripping the flesh in the movie. And so the flagrum is commonly believed, it's very well known in the ancient world, the Roman world, nasty, nasty thing, but it was commonly believed to have been what made the mark on the shroud. And especially those who think the shroud belonged to Jesus would say, oh yeah, that's probably what they used on Jesus too. But the New Testament says he was beaten.
Yeah.
It doesn't give a description.
Well, people back then knew what it was like. You
Well,
didn't have to, like a lot of ancient accounts, if they said a person was crucified, they didn't describe it. We want to kind of describe it because it's a practice that's not really familiar to us today. We don't.
you should make the point that you've made, I've heard you make many times, about ancient whippings and how serious they were and how we know because
Oh man,
body entrails and
yeah, you got Josephus talking about people being whipped to the bone. Eusebius talks about how you could see their veins and arteries and bones. So, I mean, it's.
and who made the comment about the organs falling out? They were whipped so seriously.
I don't remember.
There is an ancient reference to that, but
Okay.
it's nasty. And I'm telling you what, anybody who looks at a flagrum, whether you think it's a shroud only or the Shroud of the New Testament, neither, both, it's a wicked.
Yeah, you don't want to experience it.
It's horrible.
So in answer to, as we were discussing about that, I said The Passion of the Christ was my favorite all-time movie. Bobby asked, what was your first impression of The Passion of the Christ?
I've only seen it twice. Once because you begged me when we were here in a family. Okay, I'll tell you, the first time was the most moving one. I went with my two sons to, I've got four sons, but at that time, two sons, and we went to a nearby theater in another town, and we saw The Passion of the Christ, and as the whipping was going on, oh, it was so painful. But the movie theater we were in was a giant screen one, and there was room in front of the seats, right? And so when the movie's over, most of the crowd sat there stunned. They didn't move out of the seats. But these guys in front of us, there were three college guys in front. I don't know where they were from, what college, but they were down on their knees on the cement in front of the chair, and they were just doing this and covering their head and holding their face, and they stayed there. Well, we stayed in our chairs stunned, but we finally got up and walked out, and they were still on the floor. And we got up and looked back, they were still on the floor. So, we were surrounded by people they couldn't get over it. All right, the second time was at your house for a reunion, and you said, let's watch it. And I said, oh, Mike, that was so hard on me. I'm not crazy about it. And you said, please, please, it's my favorite movie. Watch it with me again. And we watched it a second time. I knew knowing what's coming was worse than not knowing what was coming. You know what I mean? Because it was so bad, so thorough, so.
Every time I watch that movie, I feel like I want to pray, go out and pray afterward. I just feel it puts me in a state of where I want to worship the Lord for what he's done for me. I remember the first time I saw it, I went with Debbie to see it. And when it was over, I just sat there stunned. I was without words. I didn't move.
That's how we were.
Debbie calls me Spock because of my emotions or lack of them at times. I'm pretty even, I don't get way up here, rarely ever get way down, just pretty even. But the first time seeing that movie, that just impacted me so much. I just sat there stunned. I
But
felt
the
like
time that you've seen it ever almost a dozen times shows how much of an effect it's had on you.
yeah, that was something.
That's a tough way to work through.
And look, for those of you who like those kind of movies, it's not as violent, but see the movie that came out years ago, probably, I don't know, 2015, 16. It was called Risen. And it's a quasi-fictitious movie. Yep, it's got Jesus' crucifixion. It's got his resurrection. It doesn't have all the gory stuff with the crucifixion. but it's a story about a Roman tribune who he believes the disciples stole the body and he goes out looking for it. I don't want to give anything away. It's not made as well as the Passion of the Christ, but it's a really good movie and it's got some really interesting scenes in it. I love that movie. I've watched that a bunch of times. I love the one where he like heals a leper and where he appears to them on the Sea of Galilee. Boy, there are some really good things in that movie. So anyway, Risen it's called. All right. John V asks, if the empty tomb story was historical, why is there no charge of theft in Acts? And why do Mark and Matthew lack male corroboration later added by Luke and John?
Okay, we've got a couple things here. If the empty tomb story was historical, why is there no charge of theft in the Acts? You know, some critical, we're Christians. We don't buy non-Christian themes, but some non-Christian themes are better thought through than others. But if you go by critical literature, there's that word again, about the last time that the disciple stole the body was used by a critic was Herman Samuel Reimarus about 1765. Why don't critics take that theory anymore? Because they think it's the worst theory ever. So why doesn't it come up in Acts? I think it probably occurred to the people in Acts that it was the worst theory too, because the folks who quote unquote would steal the body aren't going out gung-ho, putting their families on hold while they go evangelize and are willing to die. And by the way, the three biggest Christians, best known Christians in the early church, Peter, Paul, and James, the brother of Jesus, we have first century dates for all three of their martyrdoms, and they're the most influential ones. People who do that kind of stuff don't steal bodies and forget 2 days later that they did it. It's just that theory. If you're going to make a theory, make a good one. Don't make a bad one, and that's a bad one. So I don't think they bring it up in Acts because it doesn't fit the scene.
Well, and it's certainly brought up in Matthew.
Yeah, because he says there's guards in front of the tomb. They put, according to Matthew,
And they said, the disciples stole the body.
oh, they later said that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but there's guards there, and they're watching. And yeah, from a lot of Christian apologists, they're kind of happy when people bring that theory up because it's fairly easy, let's say, to refute that. He had another question,
Yeah.
right?
Why do Matthew and Mark lack male corroboration later added by Luke and John? So you have Matthew and Mark, you have women going to the tomb, whereas in Luke and John, you have women going to the tomb, and then some of the male disciples going to the tomb.
Yeah,
So
and it's
why
important.
don't Matthew and Mark have male disciples going to the tomb?
Well, okay, first of all, uh, not every story is told the same way from the same perspective, including the same facts. People, for example, and I thought when we walked in this question, what I thought would come up, well, wow, there's um, one angel in Matthew, one angel in Mark, two in Luke, two in John. Why those huge differences? Really? Between one and two is a huge difference? And further, there are two trips to the tomb in Luke, three in John, because Mary comes back. Guess what? In John, you
Well,
don't
that's
see
only
the
two
angel till
trips.
third trip.
That's only two trips
And what?
in John.
No, it's a third trip.
Why?
Um,
I take it she's going there with the disciples.
Mary and the women go because it's Mary and we in the text.
Right.
Luke and John. I don't think Mary's going to keep up with the men. Luke and John go, and when they leave,
Then Mary's there.
Mary,
Yeah.
and that's when she's the first witness,
Yeah.
and that's the only time in John where the angels are mentioned. So yeah, but at any rate, between one angel and two, I'm just saying it's like that. People tell stories different ways. So Mark doesn't mention both, Matthew doesn't mention both, Luke
Yeah.
does, John.
I think about conversations with my wife, Debbie. It's like, I'll be maybe talking to you or someone on the phone and she'll say, it didn't happen that way. So-and-so was there too.
Just since we've been here, she did that 2 nights ago.
That's true.
I said, yeah, I've heard the story before.
All right. Well, we need to move along a little faster, okay,
All
to
right.
get through some of these. All right. So that one guy that you answered earlier says Nathan made me doubt the shroud because John describes multiple cloths and a separate head cloth with spices, the Sudarian, right?
Yeah.
So how could the Turin shroud be one sheet? Sorry to beat a dead horse.
Okay. No, that's fair. In our first, I have two co-authored books. I'm one of the two authors on the Shroud. The other guy, Ken Stevenson, was part of the scientific team. He's professor at the Air Force Academy. He's part of the research in 1978. In that first book, and again in the second one, we argued for 5 cloths minimum. Now, I can't explain all of these and why, but we believe that there are other cloths to tie the hands and the feet, the ankles, to put these together. What you do with the face cloth, that's a whole another story, but there was nothing laid over. A face cloth is not laid over the face. The Greek word means handkerchief, and the man in the shroud, the hair is there's a black gap on both sides of the face and the hair hangs out. So we're with you. We think there's more than one shroud. There's just one big one.
More than one cloth.
I'm sorry, more than one cloth. And for those of you who asked this question, think about this. In the Gospel of Luke uses the singular and the plural for Athonia cloths. He uses singular and plural. So we guessed that when he uses the singular, it's the big one. When it's the plural, it's all of them. But we think there's more than one.
Are there any credible biblical objections to the Shroud of Turin?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't mean to be facetious, but are we going to say, oh, his hair's too long? I think we're past that kind of stuff.
Okay. Bobby asks, what are your thoughts on movies and TV shows in general that talk about the life of Jesus and the resurrection? Now, in particular, I guess I haven't been adding those, so sorry about that, folks. So I think it's a good question, Bobby. The first one that comes to my mind, of course, is The Chosen. Now, we just watched season 5 that came out this year. Tell you what, I love it. After every episode, I've told my wife after every episode, I need a few minutes to just get alone and pray. It just does that to me. It makes me want to draw closer to the Lord.
And by the way, I don't know, maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this. You can blame me and not Mike. Most of the guys
blame him.
Most
I
of the
get
guys
enough trouble as it is.
Now, what's the name of the group that's a Roman Catholic? They call it, what's the name of the website?
The Roman Catholic, what's the name of that website?
Yeah, the one that puts the Shroud movies on.
I don't know.
Oh, the girls will know it. Anyway, Jonathan Rumi, the guy that plays Jesus, is Roman Catholic.
That's The Chosen.
The Chosen, that's what I'm talking about.
Well, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, I'm just agreeing. I'm just saying people who think, oh, you guys, you think all of you are Christians and all the rest of the world, how many Catholics are sending to hell? I mean, we got blamed with all kinds of things. He's talking about love in this movie. So do I. So do our wives. They're mostly a Catholic group that's behind it. And we're we're totally in favor of it. Mm-hmm. So we're not the judgmental kind of folks that so many people blame us with, and y'all think we think you got to go to a Baptist church and whatever. We're not like that. We're open. And to say it frankly, that God didn't call either one of us to separate the wheat and the tares. Only God does that. We do not make the choices as to who's a believer and who's not. That's not our job.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Protestant. I believe Catholics are believers, that they're going to heaven. Well, let me qualify that, okay? I believe that there are Protestants that are going to heaven and Protestants that aren't. I believe there are Catholics going to heaven and Catholics who aren't. So it's whether they follow the gospel, right? Just because you're a Catholic or a Protestant or baptized isn't going to make you a Christian.
Yeah, get this one.
A true Christian, because Jesus says at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons and perform many miracles in your name? And I will declare to them, depart from me, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So it's not just a matter of saying, well, I go to church, I'm a Catholic, I've been to confession. It's, do you have a living, authentic relationship with the living Christ?
Whomever you are.
That's right.
But a good friend of mine is a retired Russian Orthodox high official with a PhD. And he told me this, I totally agree. He said, "It is not what sign is over your church door. The question is, what have you done with Jesus Christ?" And I think that's a brilliant comment, and the man is Russian Orthodox.
Okay. So let me see if I can bring this one up. Okay, this is from Bill, and he says, "What's the best way to approach Muslims in a discussion about the resurrection of Jesus? For someone who hasn't read any of Dr. Habermas's books yet, which book might be better to start with?"
Boy, Mike, you've done more of this than me. How about the one we co-authored? Do you like that one, or do you like something else? Or
Do we really? I don't know that we. What I would do, okay, the way I would answer this question is I would focus first on the death of Jesus, because in the Quran, I believe it's Surah 4, 3 or 4, I think it's 4, verses 156, 157, it says that the Jews crucified Jesus, but he did not die. God only made it appear that he died, and God took Jesus up. But surely the Jews did not kill him. So what I do is I argue. I've done this in debates, I think, effectively with Muslims. I've got some videos on what I call on my YouTube channel called the Islamic Catch 22. And what I do is I talk about the Jesus predicted his death, and then I present several arguments. I've got several historical arguments that do not presuppose the historical reliability or the inspiration of the Bible. And so several historical arguments that show that Jesus predicted his imminent death and resurrection. So then I say, okay, there's only two options here. Either Jesus died as he predicted, or he did not. If he died as predicted, if Jesus died as predicted, well, then the Quran is mistaken. It is mistaken. And if he did not die as he predicted, then the Quran is likewise mistaken, because it calls Jesus a great prophet. And if Jesus predicted his imminent death and resurrection, and it says that he was teaching that he had to suffer and die, well, then he's predicting as prophesying his death. And if he didn't die, well, then he was a false prophet. So the Quran is wrong in that sense. And either way, it is not the word of God, because the view of the Quran is it must be perfect. It must be without any errors whatsoever. We don't have that must when it comes to the Bible. The Bible could still be true if it has errors in it. It just depends on your view of how inspiration took place. But the way Muslims believe the Quran, it's an all or nothing. It's either without error or it is not the word of God. So there you can show that if Jesus died as he predicted, the Quran is mistaken, because it says he didn't die. And if he did die, well, then the Quran is mistaken, because that would make Jesus a false prophet. And Jesus claimed to, the Muslims, and the Quran says he's a great prophet. So that's how I would deal with it. I'd focus on the death. And then, of course, if you have the death, then we can get into the evidence for the resurrection. I go over this in my book, Paul Meets Muhammad. How would you deal with it?
no, I was just going to tell the people about you. I was going to say, check out his book, Paul Meets Muhammad, because it's a mythical discussion
Yeah,
that comes up with a lot of these things, and Mike goes through them in a book by a major publishing house.
it's good. It was a fun book to write. Now, that book came out in February 2006, and there was no AI back then, but basically, the book talks about how the MIT had been working and developing the software program, which in essence is AI. And it looks at all the writings of Paul, all the stuff in the Quran and the Ahadith and the Sirat Rasulullah, the earliest biography, extant biography of Muhammad. And it looks at how they think and the things that they say. And then using hologram technology, they have the Apostle Paul and the Prophet Muhammad meet in a stadium and debate on one another on the fate of Jesus. And so that's the book. It's a short book, but that was a fun book to write.
It's a good one.
You know what's interesting? I'll just give one more thing here, because we do have to move on. There's one point in that book, like after Muhammad's opening statement. Paul gives the opening statement, then Muhammad gives it. And After Muhammad's opening statement, where he answers Paul and then presents his own arguments, some Muslim in the stadium stands up and yells out, Allah, Allahu Akbar. And all these Muslims start yelling, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And they're just saying it over and over. And then the moderator has to silence them. Well, a few months later, fast forward to November, and I debate Ali Ati, a Muslim, out at UC Davis, University of California, Davis campus. And after his first rebuttal, the place was packed, and there's a lot of Muslims in it. And after his first rebuttal, there was a Muslim that said, Allahu Akbar. And then all of them just started saying it. And the moderator had to stop them. Now, it's too bad because they deleted that out of the video. But I'm sitting there as that's going on. Whoa, I am living this debate.
It's in my book.
Yeah, it's like, that was cool. All right, so let me move on. All right, Daniel Paul Kosanam. Why Jesus wasn't, let's see here, why Jesus wasn't recognized after his resurrection? This is a fun question.
Yeah, and it's not an easy one, Daniel, but I think there's a lot of good responses. I think Jesus wasn't already recognized. Let me give you a small, just a easy answer first. Psychologically, nobody was expecting Jesus to rise again. This is clear from the text, clear from the Old Testament. No one expected him to rise again. And so if you think this guy standing over there's a resurrection, there's Mike mentioned a catch-22, something's going on inside you. That looks like Jesus, but he's not supposed to rise. So who is this? So one thing could just be psychological, but let me give you other, I think, more substantial reasons. Let me use this as an example, near-death experiences. In a lot of near-death experiences, people claim, I'll just leave it there, claim to see a family relative, a grandfather, a father, but when they appear, they see him, he's not the 92-year-old man who died. He's 25 years old, and yet they knew it was their father or grandfather. Excuse me. What if Jesus appeared and appeared to me much younger than 30 years old? What if you definitely wouldn't have thought that was Jesus until he started talking? Thirdly, the Apostle Paul says, 1 Corinthians 15, there's going to be changes. We're going to be raised in a body, our body. Jesus was raised in a body, his body. But Paul says there's going to be a lot of change. If there's going to be a lot of change, then there's going to be people asking a lot of questions. So all of those things, I think, contribute to this. Jesus mostly looked like he was, but there were enough differential things, and you don't believe in resurrection, this wasn't going to happen, and you had to be persuaded otherwise. So they didn't always get it at first.
I'd add a few things to that. So one, you've gotten Luke. Luke reports as Jesus is walking with the Emmaus disciples, it says their eyes were kept from recognizing him. So Jesus wants to kind of play with them a little bit, I think it's kind of funny when he says, well, why the long faces, guys? And he says, are you the only one in Jerusalem that doesn't, you're not aware of what happened on Friday? And Jesus kind of, no, what? And then he said, well, this Jesus, we thought he was a prophet and blah, blah, blah. And then finally, he opens their eyes to see when they break bread. So anyway, so in one, you've got their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And second, then you've got Mary Magdalene doesn't recognize Jesus at the empty tomb, right? But I've been to Israel twice now, and I've been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where most think Jesus' tomb was. And you've got these tombs in that church. It's not only Jesus' tomb, but there's other tombs. And just like the various tombs of that first century, people were a lot shorter then than we are here in the U.S., I guess, due to the extra protein we have. But you go inside the tomb and you go down, and the entrance to the tomb is small. And so I went inside this tomb, inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and turned around, and I looked at the people, my colleagues on the other side, and you could only see up to their waist. So Mary is stooped inside that tomb. And then Jesus is saying to her, she's communicating with the angels. And then Jesus says to her from outside the tomb, "Woman, why do you weep?" Right? And she thinks he's the gardener. But remember, she's turning around. She probably can only see him up to his waist. So,
That's thoughtful.
so that's a second. The third one comes from Matthew 28:17, where the disciples go to Galilee to meet him. And it says, some worshiped, but others doubted. Now that's something that has confused a lot. And I think I know the answer to this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that is the same appearance. And I argue for this in my book, Why Are There Differences in the Gospels? Spend a lot of time on this in that book. So this definitely seems like the first appearance to the group of male disciples. So you've got Jesus at the Last Supper, both in Matthew and Mark, telling them, after I have been raised, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. So he's telling them, after his resurrection, he's going to Galilee. Then in Mark 14:28, as well as the parallel text in Matthew, the angel tells the women, you're seeking Jesus. He is not here. He is risen, as he said. Now go and tell his disciples that he is going ahead. Present tense, he is on his way. He is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. And in Greek, the original language of the New Testament, the word there appears first in the clause for emphasis. There in Galilee is where you're going to see him. So Matthew places it in Galilee. Mark implies it because Mark gets cut off really abruptly at verse 8. We don't know what happened to the ending of Mark. And then you have Luke and John. Both the first appearance to the group of male disciples is in Jerusalem. Now, in Luke, we know why, because Luke is compressing everything. The resurrection, all the appearances, and the ascension happens on Easter, that one day. So he has to put everything there because he's running out of room in his scroll. But what's interesting, when the disciples are meeting, they're meeting for the first time because the Emmaus disciples have just come back. It is Easter evening, and Jesus appears to them. And it's real interesting what it says. It says, out of joy and amazement, they were unbelieving. Now, isn't that? Out of joy and amazement, they were unbelieving.
How does that go together?
The way he's using it there is the same way we would use it today, with a walk-off home run in the bottom of the ninth inning, Game 7 of the World Series, and your team just won. Unbelievable! Out of joy and amazement, they were unbelieving. That's how it's being used. It's a stronger term, but this is how it's being used when in Matthew 28:17, some worshiped, but others doubted. Now that Greek word is distazo, and it's used only one other time in the same gospel, Matthew, and that is where Jesus is walking on water, and he says, Lord, if that's you, command me to come. Well, come. And then he sees the wind and the waves, and he starts to sink. Lord, save me. And he reaches down, and he grabs him, pulls him up. Why did you doubt? He had enough faith to get out and walk on the water, but yet he's saying, how can this be? It's the wow, but how? It's thinking two things. It's not like standing there with your arms crossed, your lips pressed, and you're nodding your head, shaking your head. That's not what it means, some doubted. It's being used in the same sense as the unbelieving. So it's not it's not a matter of whether they recognized him. That's not even applied in this third one. And I just think all three of these instances that are brought up about not recognizing Jesus, why wasn't he recognized? I think they're fairly easily explained. What do you think?
No, I think we both gave like what, 3 answers?
Yeah.
That's 6. So there's some good responses to this one.
Yeah, that's a fun one, Daniel, but sorry to take so long.
Good question.
All right, Jay Pello, how does the war in heaven look like if they are spirit? Is he referring to Revelation, maybe? How does the war in heaven look like if they are spirit and no one will die if you are spirit because you have no bodies?
Are you catching that? I mean, I know the parameters here, but I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, he follows up. He says, also, let's see,
Second question.
also, if you become immortal in new earth, we don't need to eat, sleep, or exercise. Life will be meaningless because what's the use of food and water if you are immortal? 24 hours awake, no need to sleep. How can you feel if you are spirit if you don't have physical brain and neuron sensor that make us feel anything?
I'm trying to put the questions together. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure what is being asked here. The New Testament teaching, according to most New Testament scholars, is that we live on earth for X amount of years in bodies and we die. If at death, at the end of the world, Jesus hasn't appeared, the answer in the New Testament, we go into a state of bodilessness, and that might be what he means by spirit. But at the end, we are re-embodied when Jesus returns. That's the New Testament answer. So, embodied, not embodied, re-embodied. So I look at it the exact opposite way that the Paul says either state, not embodied or re-embodied. He says they're both better than this one. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, absent from the body, present with the Lord. He says it's a better state in Philippians chapter 1. But he says I prefer the final state where I am re-embodied in my resurrection body. So to me, it doesn't have anything to do with eating, drinking, or whatever. If you believe Luke, if you believe the eating that Jesus ate afterwards, I mean, that's an argument for enough for most Christians that they'll be eating and drinking. But I don't put anything on that myself. Whether we're going to eat and drink is not an issue to me. I think we go to an intermediate state is bodiless, and it's going to be wonderful. Then there's a re-embodied state, and it is more wonderful still. That's the way I do it. If that didn't answer the question, I'm not really sure what the question's answering that beyond
It's
that.
kind of saying, if we don't eat or drink or we're awake 24 hours, it could be kind of monotonous. And I mean, of course, that sounds like not much fun, but I'll tell you what, if we're talking heaven, God knows what he's doing. And I don't think we're going to be bored up there.
And I don't think we're asking are we having hamburgers or steak because we're too incredibly interested in our new surroundings and what it brings to the table.
Yeah. And whatever food, I mean, food's kind of fun.
It's fun.
So, hey, Apologetics 101 says, Mike Licona, hey, Dr. Licona and Dr. Habermas. Hey, Apologetics 101, thanks. Hey, and I want to say thank you for the super chats to Stephen Hackett and D.R. Bales. Appreciate that very much, helping to support the ministry. All right, Dennis Perez. Shroud of Turin is the greatest religious relic of all time. However, can you talk about the Tilma of Guadalupe? Do you know anything about that?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, me either. Sorry, Dennis. Caius Obiada. Sorry if I'm sure I mispronounced that. Sorry about that, Caius. Do we consider as near-death experiences those cases in which patients showed no detectable brain activity?
I think that and there are many now. In one publication alone, there are now over 4 dozen cases where there's no measurable heart or brain activity. They can say whatever you want. Oh, there's some that we can't measure. Whatever. You're in a very bad way, a very dangerous way, and I doubt you're having the most beautiful living experience of your life. So I would say yes, we not only consider those as near death, they're the most evidential ones. If you have flat brain, flat heart, and yet you have experienced from this world, not heaven. When someone says, I go to heaven, I met Jesus, we can't say you did or didn't because we don't have any evidence for that. But in this world, car accidents, things that happen, that's where the evidence is. And if it happens during a flat brain, flat heart state, that's, to me, those are among the best, if not the best, near-death experiences.
Okay. Apologetics 101. Do you guys agree with Dr. Richard Bauckham that streams of eyewitness traditions are coming from named eyewitnesses in the Gospels? I think Bauckham refers to these as inclusio. What do you think about that argument of inclusio?
Of the authors of the Gospels?
No, now Bauckham uses that in a sense for inclusio, like, you know,
Well, you've done the most study on this.
yeah. So he'll say, Mark has Peter as the first and the last in the gospel, which would one indicator that Peter is the eyewitness behind this. I think that's a decent argument. Of course, it's not provable, but it's certainly suggestive. But
Oh,
in terms of what inclusio is, it would be things like when let's say Mark lists the women who went to the empty tomb, he lists them because those are his sources. That's inclusio. And I do think that that is decent. Again, it's not provable, but he's not the only one to suggest that. Bauckham suggests that for the Gospels, but many of you are aware that in my 11-year study now of gospel differences and published 2 books on it, I've become familiar with Plutarch and some of the ancient biographical literature. And you find people like Christopher Pelling, the foremost Plutarch scholar in the world, and retired from Oxford, a classicist from there. And he mentions how Plutarch uses inclusio. So for an example, when Plutarch reports Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon, he mentions the name of Pollio there, being there with him. Well, some people who were there with him, one of which is Pollio. Now, Asinius Pollio was later became a historian, and Plutarch relied on Pollio. It is believed by classicists that Plutarch relied on Pollio for a lot of the information that is written about a number of those people who lived at that time, and participated in the same events. People like Caesar, Cicero, Brutus, Antony, people like that. That Pollio was Plutarch's main source. Pollio's writings they're no longer extant. They have vanished. They haven't survived, but they do think that Pollio was Plutarch's main source for a lot of those events. So by Plutarch mentioning Pollio there with Caesar at the crossing of the Rubicon, he's saying he's allowing Pollio to have a cameo appearance there, you might say. He's naming Pollio as his source. So this isn't just something that would be unique to the Gospels. So like Mark, he's the only one. You have Mark and Matthew mention blind men that Jesus healed near Jericho. Matthew doesn't mention the names. Mark mentions Bartimaeus, which could very well be his source. You've got Mark also mentions how Simon of Cyrene carried Jesus's cross, and he says he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. Well, why would you even name these people? Well, you'd name them because they are the sources. Alexander and Rufus are the sources for that story. So yeah, I think it's not provable, but it is strongly suggestive, I believe. What do you think?
I think that's right. I was also going to add in Mark's gospel, you mentioned the Peter and coming and going. 3 times in Mark's gospel, I'll use the third one, where the angels say, "Go tell the disciples and Peter."
And Peter.
And they wonder why Peter is. Well, why do you say Peter's name? You already said, "Go tell the disciples." Peter's already in that group.
It's
Why
completely
just
unnecessary.
because the story may have come from Peter himself,
Yes.
and of course, of all people, Peter would recall that story.
And the ancient tradition of the church is unanimous that Mark got his information from Peter. He was recalling what Peter had taught because he was there with Peter.
Hence, singling Peter out 3 times in the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And from the beginning, Peter's the first to be called. He's the last to be mentioned, even though it's unnecessary when he says, go tell the disciples in Peter. It's probably there as Peter is the source from beginning to end.
Right.
Okay, Jay asks, Dr. Habermas, regarding the minimal facts argument, if Paul passed what he received, how do you, which would be 1 Corinthians 15,
Right.
verse 3, I delivered to you what I also received. How do you understand Paul's statement in Galatians 1:12? Isn't that where he received?
Paul says, I didn't receive it from any man. I received it from Jesus Christ. Yeah, and that's not a conflict at all. He's saying he received his gospel message from Jesus. And if you go back and look at the 3 chapters in Acts 9, 22, and 26, the gospel message is very clear. And who gave it to him? Peter? No, it comes from the vision of Jesus. So Jesus gave it to him. But if that's all it is, and Paul doesn't think he got it from any person, why does he say right after that, 1:18? Why does he say, and 3 years later I went up to Jerusalem and spent 15 days, 2 weeks, with Peter and James, the brother of Jesus? So Paul means I didn't get the gospel from these guys. I didn't even know them. I'm not going up there until this time later. But Jesus gave me the gospel message. He's saying, praise the Lord. But I went up there. Why? Because they're eyewitnesses, and Paul interviews them on the gospel facts. You say, well, how do we get that? Keep reading. Galatians 2:2. I went up there to ask them about the gospel message I received. And he goes on to say, they agreed with me. So Jesus gave me the gospel. I went to the 2 eyewitnesses to hear about the resurrection, the whole gospel, resurrection appearances. And in chapter 2, they agreed with me. They not only they never corrected me. A few verses later, Galatians 2:9, they give Paul and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. So you don't give the right hand of fellowship to a heretic. So they were blessing Paul and Barnabas for ministry because what they taught was true. Paul got the main center message from Jesus. The rest of that resurrection message came from the eyewitnesses.
Okay, we got one viewer here that says, suggesting April 5th of 33 AD is when the resurrection happened. Do you have any preference on the date?
No, I don't. And I don't have a problem with that. 30 and 33 are easily the 2 most popular dates. Most scholars take 30. Maybe it's a hangover of old research. Maybe it's a nice round year, and that's the reason. But either way, I have no problem. Why do I take 30? Not because I'm dogmatic, but you have to recall, we've already done this in this lecture. It's the minimal facts argument where I use the arguments that the critical scholars allow, and the critical scholars usually go with 30 AD. I go with 30 AD to keep with their testimony, and that is my method, to use their method.
I kind of prefer 33.
Do you?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to 30. And as you know, scholars are split, and maybe just a slight majority going with 30. But the reason I like 33 is this. And again, I don't know that we can prove one way or the other.
That'd be pretty hard.
The reason I like 33 is it kind of makes sense of something that's going on in John. All right. So let's talk about something here. In antiquity, many people had patrons. So you've got Luke. He has a patron named Theophilus, who's probably financially underwriting his work on the Gospel of Luke and the sequel, the Acts of the Apostles. Politically, you're not really going anywhere unless you have a patron, someone who's really taking you under their wing, who's an experienced, influential politician and is promoting you and getting your name out there and talking about you to other influential people so that you can be promoted. Well, there was a guy in the right-hand man of the Roman Emperor Tiberius, who's the Roman emperor at the time of Jesus' death. His name was Sejanus. And the second most powerful person in Rome during the Empire days, not the Republic, but during the Empire days, of which Jesus lived during Empire, was called the Master of the Horse. I don't know why they gave him that name, but the Master of the Horse. You had the Emperor and the Master of the Horse. and the Sejanus was the master of the horse. And so Tiberius, for a while, went off to one of his islands, and he just stayed there for a while, and he left Sejanus to run Rome. Well, Sejanus had people who were very jealous of him. They didn't like him, and they wanted him out of the picture. So they spread a lot of lies about Sejanus to Tiberius, who ended up having Sejanus executed because he believed all the reports that were coming. Well, Pontius Pilate had Sejanus as his patron. And so in John's gospel, when they're bringing Jesus before Pilate, and Pilate does not want to kill Jesus, and they say, if you set him free, you are no friend of Caesar's. Well, at that point, Sejanus has already been executed if it's 33. And so that, if Sejanus has been executed and he was Pilate's patron, Pilate is aware that Tiberius has his eye on him. And so when they say, you are no friend of Caesar if you let Jesus go, it seemed like Jesus' fate was sealed at that, because Pilate is not going to take a chance with that. Now, could it still be 30? Yeah, but I'll tell you what, that incident with Sejanus, that really fits in well with a 33 death of Jesus. Anyway, all right, he asked another question. The side parts on the face of the shroud is blood where the shroud touched the sides of the face. It's not hair. What do you say about that?
It's not hair.
Yeah. The side parts on the face of the shroud, where the shroud touched the sides of the face, it's not hair.
I'm not sure what it's not
Didn't you say
hair.
something about there was like
Yeah,
a space around here
right.
and hair was pulled back?
Well, if that's what you mean, if you mean the dark spots, that's where some people think the face cloth. The face cloth in the New Testament is only mentioned two places in the Gospels: John 11, John 20. John 11 is Lazarus, John 20 is Jesus, and in both places it says the face cloth was wrapped up and tied around his face. One says, and the other one says tied around his head. And the Jewish writings outside the Old Testament required them to bind up the jaw because the jaw springs open in death. So they put the face cloth is round up, tied around, and that seems like what holds the hair. The hair is like out in space, and it stops here, and it looks like hair is keeping the face from the cloth. That could be the face cloth, if that's what you're asking. And you say it's not hair. No, it looks like it could be the face cloth, the more linen cloth.
Okay. So John asks, what are your thoughts on the work of the late Dr. Michael Heiser?
Well, I've been reading Michael Heiser recently. I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but I greatly respect his work. PhD in Semitics from University of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a wonderful program. He's a man who comes out of there. I generally, let's put it this way, I'm not Old Testament, so I'm not the good guy to judge hook, line, and sinker. But when I read Michael Heiser, I'm open to almost anything he says because he's brilliant and he uses Old Testament and he's got these facts down. So I respect him. I understand this may not be true, but I understand that his wife is coming out with a massive volume that he died of cancer, I think when he was just 61, and she's putting a big volume together with a lot of his work. So you fans of Michael Heiser, stay tuned. There may be a big volume that's already out or coming out. I don't know, but I like him, and I intend to at least I give him a long hearing, and I would say I agree with a lot of what he says.
I've heard a lot of great things about him, and I know a lot of people have benefited from his teachings. But again, yeah, I'm with you. He's Old Testament. I just don't follow Old Testament. It's not that it's not of interest. It's
Just not your field.
we only have so much time, right?
And not my field, exactly.
All right, Dr. Bales, what are y'all's recommended reading from the early church fathers for apologetics?
Well, you know where I would tell them to start. If you're saying early church fathers, I would start with the early church fathers. I would start with the books that are published that are called the Apostolic Fathers. And you get writings from people starting with Clement. He may be the same Clement mentioned in the book of Philippians, and Clement is usually dated to about 95 AD. Guess what? That's the common date for Clement is roughly the same as the common date for John, 90 to 95 AD. So Clement's a very early source. He wrote an epistle to 1 Corinthians. There's a later one of Clement with his name on it, but nobody thinks he wrote that one.
Mm-hmm.
But the main one is his. You have Ignatius and Polycarp writing from 107 to 110 AD approximately. Those are three sources that are only one at the same time as John, Clement, and two within about 15 years of John. So if you think John, like Bauckham, if you think John is early enough, or a name we haven't mentioned yet, Craig Keener, if you think John's early enough to make a big difference, these three guys are at the same time or up to 110. Now add some others in there, and Mike can take over and go on.
Fragments of Papias.
Pardon?
Fragments of Papias.
Maybe it's probably it's probably the book that most scholars, most critical scholars, there you go, Christian, non-Christian, whatever, scholars think if we could pick one book we don't have that we wish we had, it's his book from about 125 AD. He's the one that makes a comment about Mark being the scholar, being the work behind, Peter being the source.
If I could have one of the lost ones, I might choose the real 1 Corinthians.
The what?
The real 1 Corinthians. I mean, we have 2nd and 3rd Corinthians, or maybe 2nd and 4th. So I would want because Paul said it when I wrote to you. He says this in 1 Corinthians. So
yeah,
we've got the second one, and then what is it?
Going back to Paul himself. Yeah.
Yeah, and Colossians, he talks about read my letter that's come to you from Laodicea. That'd be kind of nice. Now,
that'd be nice. But the question says early church fathers, so I would go with the Apostolic Fathers and start moving forward.
Papias is the one I want.
We have Justin Martyr from about 150. His dialogue with Trypho, the Jewish, who knows if he lived or not, but they're the ones he dialogues with. Irenaeus, 180 AD, one of the best known books on heresies in the early church. There's a lot of good stuff in the first few decades.
Yeah, for sure. All right. We got Edward Barber. Where in Scripture does it say the Gentiles or any other nation ever preach the Word of God? I don't get that.
Is the question, how are they going to be brought in? Or
says that where in Scripture does it say the Gentiles or any other nation ever preached the Word of God?
Now, this is probably not what Edward meant, but how about a comeback, something like this? Oh, I didn't mean that. But what about if Luke is the author of the Gospel and Acts, the longest books in the New Testament, together is over a third of the New Testament? Luke was a Gentile, and he preached the Word of God, but I got an idea this is something else, but I don't get the question.
Yeah, well, you asked a question before that. I thought it was that question we just brought was a restatement, but I don't think this adds any clarity. First, he says, why do the Gentiles teach the Word of God, and it's against God's protocol?
I don't get the question.
Yeah,
I'd take a stab if I knew what the question was. You would too.
Yeah, sorry, Edward. All right. Boy, all right. We're getting close. We still have a way to go here, but let's see.
Galatians 1:12, we already got that one.
Yep. All right, Jay Pello again. Okay, so it means we will have new earth, but big with new different plants, animals, or extraordinary creatures and things that is different to earth we have right now, and we are immortals jaunting 24/7.
I don't know. If this means there's going to be a lot of differences in the next life, I agree. But outside of those specific references, I think we're in, we know the famous verse, eyes not seen, ears not heard. It's revealed by the Spirit. But as other passages say that, 1 John 3:2, we still don't know. I think we're in for a lot of great surprises. And maybe I've published a lot of things on near-death experiences. If one thing we learn from near-death experiences, they are totally surprised by what they see. And that's not the end. So I think at the end, there's going to be a whole lot of new things.
And that's cool.
Very cool things,
All
yes.
right, Apologetics 101. Thank you, Dr. Habermas, for our interview. I'm currently going through your interview with Sean McDowell on the NDE interview you did with him. You did an interview with Apologetics 101?
Yeah, and pretty soon coming up with Sean, I've got another one on reincarnation in just a few weeks. So you can be looking for that one too.
Okay, let's see. Jonathan says, what do we make of non-Christians who have very similar experiences?
You mean NDEs? It's got to be near-death experiences, right?
Okay,
Okay.
well,
I
let's
think there's a
answer it
pretty
that way.
easy answer. If a Christian says, I died, went to heaven, and I saw Jesus, we go, oh, hey, that's great. Praise the Lord. That's what we expect. That's what our book says. And then someone else says, I'm a Muslim, I'm a whatever, and I died and went to heaven, and they told me I was going to be in heaven too. What do you do with that? Real easy. I think the evidential cases, I've done a lot of publishing. We're now up to, in my latest article, essay, I've argued over 500 evidential near-death experiences, over 500. So we have a lot. But the evidential cases almost totally come from earthly appearances, like while you're out, flat brain, flat heart, in the middle of that time, there's a car accident. You explain what color car hit what color car. We have a police report, but you were dead at that time. I mean, clinically dead, your heart and brain not working. And we have a report for both the death and the car accident. They're earthly cases. The heavenly ones, I smile and I go, man, that's a really cool report. Thank you for telling me. But here's the problem. When someone says they met Jesus in heaven, they meet somebody else, whatever, with virtually no exceptions, they're not evidence cases. I only accept evidence cases so I can listen to you. I don't denigrate it. I don't say you're a loser. But when someone says, you say, well, aren't non-Christians going to heaven? Because I don't use those for cases for either Christians or non-Christians. I don't use them. Why? Because I don't have data that tells me who you hugged in heaven. I don't have any evidence for it. So I listen. It could be true. It could be true. God knows, but I don't.
Okay, so we got another question here from Jay. Is it required that we see Paul seeking information from the other apostles in Galatians? Galatians 2, I guess, when he goes out
What
and talks to Peter, James, and John.
one and two.
My understanding is that, oh, that's true, yeah. My understanding is that Paul had the more mature gospel message, emphasizes that he was not influenced by the 12.
He doesn't say that he wasn't. Okay, let me ask you a question. If Paul was not influenced by the 12, why did he go to Jerusalem just 3 years after his conversion and asked Peter and James, the brother of Jesus, to tell him the story of what they saw with the resurrected Jesus? Galatians 2:2. Why did he, if he wasn't listening to him, why did he go there? It's a long trip in those days. You didn't get on a plane and zip there. So why did he go listen to him? And the first part of that, um, is it required that we see Paul, the the mature gospel message? No, I don't think that's true either, because in Galatians chapter 2, Paul lays the gospel, he says, I laid out the gospel message I was preaching, and they agreed with me. To me, what I see is Peter, James, the brother of Jesus. By the way, John is in Galatians 2, the second trip. And Paul, the four biggest names in Christian history, they all agreed on the nature of the gospel. So I can't see anybody was preaching the true gospel and the other ones weren't. I don't see that at all in the text.
Okay, this looks like the last question. If any of you have any other questions, it's time to write in, because we'll be wrapping this up if after this question, if no one else asks any. Bill Conger says, are either of you scheduled as presenters at the NOBTS Defend Conference? For someone just starting to learn more about apologetics, what initial books would you recommend to study?
Yeah, we both teach apologetics everywhere. Schools, graduate programs. We both teach in I'm at Liberty and Mike's at Houston Christian. You should just see our bibliographies and our courses. I speak at that conference, Lord willing. I have a plenary to give, and I have 2 breakout sessions. I speak 3 times, and my plenary, some of you may be surprised, You won't be surprised at my plenaries on the resurrection, but you may be surprised that my lecture on the resurrection is, what does it say to suffering today? What does the resurrection of Jesus say when you lose a loved one? What does the resurrection say when you're going through the worst time of your life? That's my message there. What books? Boy, Mike and I wrote a good one on the resurrection, the case for the resurrection of Jesus. And if we could argue from sales, that thing's going crazy right now. So that's a good book on the gospel message. Craig Keener's works. How many guys can you recommend? I mean, yeah, Bill Craig stuff. Craig Hazen has good stuff. Paul
Yeah,
Copenhagen,
Bill Craig, like On Guard would be a good book. Oh, Lee Strobel.
Lee
He's got
Strobel,
the Case for Christ, Case for Faith, Case for Creator, In Defense of Jesus. Then now he's got the Case for Miracles,
Paul Copan,
Paul Copan, and
another one.
Matthew Flanagan.
Matthew
They have the
Flanagan,
stuff
an
about the
Australian scholar.
yeah, and they wrote it to get like, did God command
That,
genocide in the Old
that's the
Testament? I think it was
genocide. Yeah,
called.
that's the genocide one. And by the way, Michael Heiser was mentioned earlier. He's got a totally different approach to what happened to Michael Heiser is worth a read. He's one of the guys like Nabil Qureshi, who died at a very young age, and
Yep.
we don't know why, but the Lord knows.
Frank Turek, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
That's a great book. Frank's a great guy. He's a fantastic speaker, and he also is, well, I don't know about into BTS, but he's at the Seven Evangelical Seminary conference coming up in just a few weeks. He's the closing speaker there.
Look for stuff by Sean McDowell and Brett Kunkle. Tactics by Greg Kokel. That's a decent
The new
one.
one in Christology by
Oh yeah, by Ed Komaszewski and Rob Bowman. You have to look up their names now.
Richard Bauckham's book on the Gospels.
Yeah, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses by Richard Bauckham.
I mean,
now,
we're not going to get in trouble by not mentioning our friends.
Yeah, Robert Bowman and Ed Komaszewski. They say, how do you spell Komaszewski?
Try.
I think it's KomochefChewski. I think that's how you.
Or check it on Google.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, there's so many good books, so many really good books. If you're something on, since you're getting started in apologetics, if you want something on differences in the Gospels, I'll do a shameless plug of Jesus Contradicted, the book that came out I wrote a year ago. I don't like the title. I wanted to name it Reading the Gospels for the First Time Again.
I'll tell you what, though, I will put a plug in. I'm teaching a PhD course, Lord willing, just like about 2 weeks, and I'm requiring Mike's book as my chief text for that PhD class. So it's heady, yes, but you can persevere and get through it.
That's not too heady, though, would you say?
No, it's not heavy, but you have to pay attention when you read.
Yeah, that's true. In terms of NOBTS, I did speak there for several years. It was years ago. But then my book that came out in 2010, The Resurrection of Jesus, A New Historiographical Approach, there were a number of Southern Baptists who did not like my take on the saints raised at Jesus' death, and I got banned from that conference. So now I'm persona non grata there. I hear it's a good conference. There's several really good apologetics conferences out there. Yeah, I'm persona non grata there. But Gary, you do speak there quite often. All right, here's Jonathan. He asks this question. Let me ask this again. If we believe that non-believers do not inherit eternal life, how do they have NDEs where they seem to encounter a Jesus figure that indicates they will have life beyond this? Honestly, Doc, I know I've asked you this, and I struggle with this. I do, especially when it be like, I don't know if there are any NDEs like this, but let's take it this way. Let's say that you take a Hindu, okay, and they have an NDE, and they believe they're in heaven. If I had an NDE and I was in heaven, I would take that as confirmation that my worldview is correct. So it seems to me that if let's say a Hindu dies and has a heavenly experience, maybe not with Jesus, but with Vishnu or Krishna, something like that. They come back thinking that Hinduism is true. That would seem to be pretty compelling evidence.
But it's only your testimony. And I'm really
Yeah.
strict about how much I do the same thing to make it fair.
Let me just say one more thing.
Yeah.
It would seem, if that actually occurs, it would be unfair of God to condemn a person like that, to damn a person forever for that, when it's like, man, I guess if you're a Calvinist, you're all right with it. But it just seems to me it would be
You're going to get yourself in trouble.
I know. It seems to me that it would be immoral of God to damn a person like that had such evidence. It's like, why would you allow them to have something like that?
All right. Since you brought this up, number one, I'm very strict on the definition of data and in the NDE accounts. And if you tell me you met anybody in heaven, I can smile and say, wow, that sounds like a really interesting story. But I don't believe Christians even. I don't have any evidence that Christians met Jesus because there's no follow up. There's no basis for it. I'm not just prejudiced by rejecting Hindus. I don't believe the Christians. And here's another one: 21% of all recorded, most recorded near deaths, depending on the book, of the study. 21% are hell cases. Oh, Habermas, I'll bet you really believe the hell cases because you guys love hell cases. No, I don't believe them for the same reason. So
You don't believe any of them?
I'm an equal rejecter if there's not data. I'll listen. I'll say you might be right. You might be right. And then the second comment is this. I've got a good friend, Steve Miller. He just did a book on what I'm going to describe. Steve took 100 continuous NDE accounts and a world NDE, a world account of testimony. And there are all kinds of religions. And he took 100 in a row consecutively. He didn't pick the ones he wanted. He took 100 straight. He asked, how many of these people met somebody and who did they identify? Now I'm going to goof this up because it's been a year since I've read this, but get this. Nobody mentioned Muhammad. Nobody said they saw Buddha. I don't think anybody sees a Hindu God. 20 of the 100 said they saw Jesus, and guess what? Several of the 20 were not Christians, and they said they met Jesus. Now, oh, no, not Habermas, you're really going to accept this one. Sorry, I don't have any backup. But it is very interesting. Here's what it teaches us, not evidence, but it teaches us to be careful to identify. It's this argument. Oh, yeah, but I heard about that. I can't accept NDEs because Hindus see a Hindu god, Buddhists see a Buddhist god, Muslims see, and so on, and Christians see Jesus. That's not really the way it goes down. And this study says virtually nobody sees anybody they identify except Jesus at 100 state international NDEs. I got to think about that, and some of them are not Christians. And they said they saw Jesus. But I still, before anybody says anything, I still don't accept them. And if you tell me about hell, I go, golly, I'm sorry. I'm sure that hooked you up. But I mean, bothered you. But I don't write my eschatology based on their experience on hell and heaven. I don't accept those either.
Yeah, I had a student several years ago, Charlotte. I believe her last name was Thomason. It's pretty neat. She had an NDE. She was raped by her father or stepfather when she was really young, I think like 12 years old, and got pregnant. And she died in childbirth. And she went to heaven, and she was up there. It was beautiful. And she saw Jesus, or the person she identified as Jesus, who was holding her baby. And she wanted to get the baby. And he says, no, you can't have it, but you will. You will someday, but not now. Well, why can't I have it? Because you've got to go back to earth.
Oh, that's common.
She gets resuscitated only to find out that her baby died in childbirth. That's kind of
That
interesting.
could happen. I know of a case where a fireman.
By the way, the video of that, it's a short video. If anyone's interested in it, they go to my YouTube channel, Dr. Mike Licona. And I forgot you're gonna, I don't know what the title of it was. Woman dies or girl dies or NDE. I don't know what it is. Maybe do a search for the name Charlotte, see if that comes up. It's a very interesting testimony. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I know of a case where a guy who was really committed to the Lord, his family's committed to the Lord, his daughter and their only grandchild was killed in a head-on collision from two guys who were racing and came at them and killed them. And there's no coming back with an ND and all that. But a fireman came up to them when they were getting the bodies from the cars and bringing them to the ambulance. And the fireman attested, I don't know what to do with this, but I don't build evidence in this either. It's not evidential, but it's interesting. The fireman said, as I was taking the deceased baby, I saw what I can only describe is the baby spirit going up. Now you think, okay, that's silly. There are dozens of cases of things like that, and doctors. Most of them are from doctors, and I can tell you the book where it's in. But there's a lot of cases like that. I still am real careful because I don't think that's hard evidence, but it could all be true.
Okay. Jeff asks, can both of you comment on the writings of Dr. George Lamsa?
I could if I knew who it was, but I don't think I've read them.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've never heard of him either. So sorry about that. All right, this comes from Michelle. Does God owe us anything?
Real short, no.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. He's given us everything, In fact, Jesus talks in one of the Gospels about how if you do everything that God asks, it's not that you should expect a reward. It's like, well, I've done what you asked. I'm your servant. I did what I was supposed to do.
Yeah, no, I don't think we owe God anything. And like Mike said, we get everything from God. But yeah, and we're not Calvinists. I mean, I'm not coming down to Calvinists at all. I'm just saying, I think Calvinists would say God doesn't owe us anything either. But we're not, and we say the same answer. So we're sharing the same answer.
Okay, looks like this is the final question from Stephen Hackett. Why are presuppositional apologetics not the best approach?
Oh my. Okay, I'm the author of 5 views on I'm one of the authors, co-author, on 5 views of Christian apologetics. Zondervan sells it's been in print for 25-ish years. And it depends. No, wait a minute. There's more than one species of presuppositionals. Let me just give you an example. I don't want to be nasty. Alvin Plantinga is a presuppositionalist, and that guy is sharp, 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 and you'd be hard put to put him down or disprove his stuff. But he's a different species. Many people mean the presuppositionalists that come out of, well, I don't want to put anybody down, but Westminster Seminary, that group, I respect them, and our students go there. We hired a professor in our school who's got a PhD from Westminster. It's fine, but I don't like it because no matter how, look at, you're all gonna disagree with me, but I don't like it because no matter how softly you say it, in my opinion, it looks like you're saying you accept the Bible on its own testimony, and in some way or another, and don't say I don't understand it, go back and read my critique in that 5 views book. I don't like views that start with Scripture because you think you're not doing God a favor if you don't start with Scripture. So you start with Scripture and you kind of say, the Bible says, but I shouldn't be arguing circularly, but we all have to argue circularly, so that's the answer. I don't buy that initial step that's commonly called Van Tillian presuppositions. By the way, I debated Van Til when he was alive. I respect the man. He's a beautiful person. When he died, he's PhD in philosophy from Princeton. And yet when he died, Christianity Today asked him, what do you want to be remembered as? A PhD in philosophy from Princeton?
I guess they asked him before he died.
Before he died. You're right. And he said, I want to be remembered as an evangelist. I respect that kind of response. I respect that humility. I respect that he wanted to see people come to the kingdom. So I'm not putting people down. I don't see how that first step, though, starting with Scripture and then saying I'm not starting with Scripture, no matter how you explain it. I can't get over that. I can't get by that first step.
In terms of for me, I don't have a problem if someone wants to do presuppositional apologetics. It would not have convinced me.
Nor me.
So um, I would just say, look, if someone wants to do it, if they find it effective, I mean, it's not sinful to do it. It's kind of like, the debate. There are some out there who don't like the minimal facts approach.
That's true.
They think do the whole thing.
And we allow
Liability
that.
of the
We're
Gospels. It's
okay.
like, hey, I feel it's like what Paul said in Philippians chapter 1, although that's a greater extreme. He talks about those who are preaching Christ from envy and rivalry versus those who do it out of good will, knowing that he was appointed for the defense of the gospel. And then he says, what then? What's my response to this? Only that in every way Christ is proclaimed, and in this I rejoice. And so it's like, okay, if you want to do presuppositional apologetics, go for it. You're free to do it. It would not have convinced me, but there is not a one size fits all.
And there may be other people who aren't convinced by it. So
Yeah.
different strokes for different folks. I think that's a paraphrase of Paul in 1 Corinthians 9.
Well, folks, we're going to end there. And so thank you for joining us. Wow, we went an hour and 50 minutes. And, we meet every year. The Habermasses come and visit us, and we'll try to do this every year that they come. There's one we did last year, so you can go back and click on our YouTube channel, Dr. Mike Licona, look for live, and then you can see where, what we did last year. Maybe we did it in some previous years too. I forgot. But check us out. And thank you for joining us. Appreciate it very much. God bless you.
Good night.